Hello, welcome to Teledyne ISCO's July webinar. Today we will be focusing on the most important part of continuous processing, the pump. This will be led by Nick Dodavo, our pump product manager. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat function within the Cisco WebEx system, and please make sure that you are sending to the host and presenter. We will take questions afterwards and work through those as they come in. At this time, I'm going to send it over to Nick to get started.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking some time to sit with us and learn and talk more about continuous processing and how the pump plays into that activity. First and foremost, just a little bit about who I am. I am the product line manager over our pumps business here at Teledyne ISCO. Been in business line, product line management for over 17 years, with 12 years of it spent mostly in the pump business, working in the oil and gas, pharmaceutical, chemical, and food and beverage areas. So many of you I might have seen a few different times in different organizations I work for, but bringing some pump knowledge to the table to help us grow and to move into new markets. So with that, let's get into our topic. I'm going to talk a little bit about continuous processing and what is that concept. And I hope everybody can hear me well enough. If not, let me know or let us know by message. First off, kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We will be focused on how the pump relates to continuous processing. We're also going to talk about some of the different pumping technologies that are out there, not just ones that you might have seen from Teledyne ISCO. Continuous processing is very applicable to many different markets. Pharmaceuticals, plastics, oil and gas, chemicals, they have different types of processes that are designed centered around this concept. You'll hear this other terms when you're speaking about continuous processing, like flow chemistry, reaction chemistry. Those would be terms that are somewhat synonymous to this whole concept. And really the basics of designing a continuous process can apply in either the R&D section, drug discovery or research lab, scale and pilot, and production level. Many places develop facilities, complete factories that are all continuous processing locations to have more applicable, more material being developed. So let's just get this on the table. I mean, what is continuous process? So when we talk about manufacturing, because what we're doing is we're creating drugs, we're creating new ways to use oil, we're creating products out of the things we're talking about. It's a method that's used by manufacturing that you put out the greatest quantity of product over the least amount of time. In all reality, its converse application is batch processing, where you take a bunch of materials, you make a group of one type of a product, stop it, reboot, recalibrate, and start another one. Continuous processing plant, are basically designed for a seamless flow of the product. Go from one machine to another station to another station. It's all just one always working manufacturing process. Conversely, when we look at flow chemistry, again, a term that's kind of used here, is the chemical reaction is run continuously rather than batch production like we just talked about. Flow chemistry is becoming much more appropriate and applicable for in the pharmaceutical markets, and you're hearing more about it in the plastics and obviously oil and gas. You'll see a lot in relation to laboratory settings, but for the most part, it does move out to production level. So in a very one simple slide, this is kind of the differences between a batch processing and flow chemistry and or continuous process. When you're looking at a batch, you've got two chemicals, two products, two reagents, what you're using in your facility, being put into a holding device, whether it be a mixing tank, a reactor, etc. And it's the reaction, the new product, the third product is being created within that batch. It's classic. It's the way things have been done for years and still continues to be done today. I'm not going to come out and say that, flow chemistry is new and it's something that is fresh and new idea. It's been around for a long time, but it's becoming more appropriate and more applicable because of the ability of it to create things at a more of a lean process. With the batch processing, some of the key factors you've got to worry about are, concentration, is getting the right mixing, is the temperature staying the same, et cetera. When you look at flow chemistry, over to the right and upper right of the slide, the idea here is two chemicals or reagents for this aspect are meeting in what can be considered either a reactor or some type of vessel or tube, and out comes a third or a fourth type of a chemical. One thing to keep in mind here is, these pictures are showing two reagents coming in at a time. This can be up to 10, 15, 6 different reagents at different flow rates and different methods, et cetera. And we'll talk more about that as we go. But as you've got this coming out, so outside on the other side of the reactor will be the product you're trying to create, or reactor or whatever vessel you may be using. Some of the key factors for success when it comes to flow chemistry or continuous processing is the flow rate, the temperature, and the mixing rate. There are some advantages and disadvantages of what we're considering to be continuous processing, continuous manufacturing of materials. The advantages are very clear when it comes to uniform product. Anytime you have a batch process, and if you happen to make, say, chemical A in the batch process, and you make so much of it, you make 500 grams of it, then you stop, recalibrate, make something else, and then go back and make that original chemical again, make another 500 grams batch, there might not be consistency between the two batches. As much as we try, that's very difficult in a batch process. In a continuous processing or continuous flow chemistry, as we see here, you have the same dosage, the same amount of material coming in from whether reagent A, reagent B, you have them coming in at the same rates you prescribe all the time. It allows you to make longer run production, create larger volumes of product. All you have to worry about is continuously feeding the reagents, however many you have, making sure that material doesn't run out. So at the end of the process, you will have a flow, continuous stream of the new product you're trying to create. It's easier to design and optimize. You're just figuring out how you can get the different chemicals together and through the reactive process, and then you just kind of collect the third chemical at the end. Obviously, more uptime. You're more productive. You're producing more product because you don't have to take the time to worry about shutting it down, restart, cleaning materials. Obviously, you do that over time, but with a batch process, once you're completed with making that batch, you have to restart again. So this is like flipping a switch, off it goes, and just checking at it here and there. There are some disadvantages to this. Expensive initial setup. There's sometimes a pretty heavy investment to start the process. But over the life of how long you run your process, your ROI gets better because you're saving the downtime that you might have had, less labor that you have to worry about. And then if your main facility or process is set up for one product, you can be advantaged because you're making just that process, making that product. That can be a disadvantage. It doesn't give you the flexibility to make more different types of products or chemicals at one time. So this has to be considered whenever you're looking at this type of process. So just to show some pictures of what the basic idea is, many of you on the phone I have an understanding of what this is, but I wanted to show just what the idea is. Obviously on the left here, you see two reagents coming in. They're going through a temperature-controlled reactor, and you have a third product coming out. That's very basically what continuous processing is when it comes to manufacturing or chemical reactors. Some other pictures here, very simplistic, but you can see just how the diagram rolls out the idea of what continuous process is. And then you can see the picture down below shows a couple pumps doing it, and this gets into the crux of our presentation. So given that, looking at the pictures I showed previously here, especially one in the lower right, you can see that pumps are very important, or if not the most important part of the continuous processing system. Obviously, arguments can be made for the materials themselves, arguments can be made for the reactors because the reaction doesn't occur without that. Fully understand that. but from the core of what you're trying to do, you're moving two chemicals or three chemicals, however, through a process in creating a third or a fourth or whatever. You can't do that without some type of mechanism to move the product. The pump is what moves the product through there. When you're designing your continuous process, you want to make sure you consider some very key things, and this is going to be very appropriate through any types of industries you're working. Okay, you need accurate. Flow rates have to be accurate, especially at low flow rates, because in some chemical reactions, just even a minute change can have a whole change in how the process works. And your pumps, you would like them to have a wider flow rate range, so you can use them for more than just one process, and they become more flexible over time. Chemical compatibility, very, very important. If the chemical that you're using or moving through the fluid path is in any method can react with the metal or the material you're using through the fluid path, you're going to degrade the integrity of the chemical or the product. You're also going to degrade the viability and the life of the pump over time. And then in the third case, it could be just completely disastrous and you have leaks, et cetera. So you really need to be very aware of chemical compatibility with the metals in the fluid path. Pulsations, we'll get into some of these later. In a continuous process, the idea is a flow, a steady flow rate of reactions happening. So pulsations can cause problems with that. The ability to be able to manage different pressures. And then you want to look at footprint and communication ability. These are all things you need to consider. And we're going to dive into this just a few more layers down as we go through this presentation. So let's look at flow rate. Flow rate is a very key component of the success of a continuous process system. It can vary with each reagent. So many times you'll have an application that's designed that has a flow rate of 5 milliliters a minute for one reagent. The next the reagent B might be 0.05 milliliters a limit because it only needs that much dripping in. And then you could have a third reagent at 25 milliliters a minute. So you have different flow rates going in and going into the reactor or the vessel that you're using that can actually affect the composition of how the end material, the end product. You need to be very aware of the ability of the pump or pumps you're using to manage this flow rate and to be very accurate. Accuracy is very key because, as we just stated, a drop of something or a couple of drops more of a certain material can really change the overall end result. So accuracy is very, very important. You can regulate the flow rate into the process with a valve. You can manually close a valve to stop a certain reagent going in, then open it, or have it electronically done. There are ways to manage that. You have to consider that and how it works with the pumps that you're installed on your process. As I stated before, proper flow rate, accurate flow rate can definitely affect material integrity. If you're dissipating color or flavor in food and beverage or color into plastic, these are things you have to be very, very concerned about. Another key point to look at is pulsation. Pulsation in a flow rate, in a specific applications for flow chemistry, can be very damaging to the process. Many times we get asked to have as little pulsing as possible. There are certain pumping technologies out there that are more appropriate for that than others. So some of the pumping technologies that are out there, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, if you add a pulse dampener, either build it into the pump as an option or add it into the process or the flow of the process, that can definitely alleviate things and help the pulsation also. And then pulsation might not be a problem for you. The chemical or the material you're using isn't as reactive to a bump or a pulse or a change in flow rate as others might be. So you have to look at that and determine how much pulsation you can have, and that'll help narrow down to the type of pump or the pump that you're looking for. Couple that with the ability to get down to a low flow rate or a high flow rate. These are first two things you want to be considering when you're looking at a pump. The third one, another big one here I mentioned, is chemical compatibility. Life of the pump is definitely an issue. Safety of the people working there is definitely an issue. If the material going through the fluid path, it reacts negatively to the actual material of the fluid path, you could have a significant issue on your hands. You need to make sure you consider all options as far as the type of material you're using and how it reacts with the different material paths that are out there. Some examples that you'll see in pumps or in the pump fluid paths, you'll see ISCO, you'll see Pics, Teflon coated, you'll see stainless steel, you'll see titanium. There are other materials out there that are variants of these, different types of stainless steel, like nitronic 50s, 316 stainless steel, etc. Make sure you kind of work with the vendor, work with your supplier to really dial down on how the chemical you're using or even creating will react with these types of materials. Additional things to consider when you're setting this up: the footprint that the pump takes up. I've been in a bunch of labs over my time, and one common denominator is the space is very tight, especially under certain fume hoods, etc. You want to look at and consider, can you accomplish the same result with a smaller footprinted pump, different size pump, differently mounted? Many pumps out there, I know some of the pumps that ISCO has, can be mounted upside down, sideways. Use the space accordingly. Does the pump have to be mobile? Will you be moving this process? Will you be running this process for 4 weeks and then shifting it and moving it somewhere else, or tearing it apart and using the pump differently? Things you need to consider. Is the pump scalable? As we talked about, this is used in this type of design, process design can be used in R&D, scale, and pilot. If you're using it in your R&D lab and you've got it to a point where this is how exactly we want to use this pump, how we want to use this process, can you use the same pump as you scale up? Can you use it in production? And then you have to, obviously you have people to help you with that, but you need to consider that. Single, dual heads, another consideration. And then what other equipment do you need, and what is the impact of the project cost and the ROI? We talked about reactors. How big of a reactor do you need? Do you need a small microreactor? Do you need a large reactor vessel? Do you need more valving, as we talked about how to adjust the flow rate? You want to look at that and see what part the pump can help alleviate, or where different types of pumps can help with the overall design. As I talked about earlier, if you have a certain type of pump, you need to add a pulse dampener to reduce pulsation. Can you use a different pumping technology to minimize the pulsing and maybe save some cost over the life of the project? These are things you need to consider. So let's talk a little bit about different types of pumps that are out there in the market today, or pumping technologies. We're not going to get too much into vendors. We're going to just get into the different technologies. So first off, there is syringe pump technology. And what I want to be clear is not the tabletop syringe you would see kind of from Harvard, et cetera. This is more the syringe pumps like ISCO has, like the D series that ISCO has, or some other competitors out there have a vertical or dual syringe pump. Long-lasting design. A syringe pump can go for a long time. You just got to make sure you maintain, you grease the gearing, and the pumps will work forever. They work a very long time, which helps the ROI. Pulsation is extremely minimal when it comes to this type of a technology. Is just about pulseless. So when we talked about earlier, if you are concerned about pulsation through your process and you're going to have to spend money to add a dampener, et cetera, you can look at a syringe pump technology, and maybe the cost differential is going to be better or the same. Very precise flows. Accuracy is very high with a syringe pump, and you can get to some much higher pressure. Disadvantages is, not going to lie, the initial investment might be higher than you would have for other types of pumping technology. And for most part, footprints are a little bit bigger, depending on the capabilities you need. If you don't need a lot of high pressure, a lot of fluid movement, you can get some smaller footprinted syringe pumps out there. But if you want the full capabilities and higher pressures, you're going to need the bigger ones. And then, obviously we can help with that. So this is one technology. Another technology that you can use that is used very much in HPLC application is reciprocating pump technology. You get to high pressure, low flow, very proven design, simply like a train engine, as you can see the animated GIF going on there. But not going to lie, there are some disadvantages to a reciprocating type pump. Viscous fluids can be difficult. So if you're using a very gummy or paste, and if one of your reagents are thicker or more viscous fluid, maybe for that reagent you're going to have to use a reciprocating pump, and for the other ones you can use a syringe pump or another technology. There are check valves involved. Sometimes with the materials you're using, you have to make sure you consider that, because there could be gumming, which could cause performance issues down the road. look at the materials and the type of pump you want to use. It's not a pulseless flow, but you can add pulse dampeners or buy one separately and include them in the process. That will minimize the pulsation. If pulsation is your number one issue for this particular reagent you need to add in, I would say maybe take a look at syringe pump technology, and then next step down, look at a reciprocating pump with a pulse dampener. Peristaltic technology is another one. This is a very simple concept. It's a roller that's pushing out something through a tube. There's no wetted part. The only wetted part is the hose. If you're dealing with drugs or medical materials, you have to consider FDA concerns if the chemical or the medicine or the material you're using or pumping in will ultimately end up being going into the human body. Those are things you have to consider. I do know that maintenance on these are really easy. Many of the new peristaltic pump technology out there. You change the front head, take the head off, put a new head on, you're done. It's like 5 minutes, you got a new hose. Where the expensive part comes in is your wear life. Depending on the different chemicals you're pushing through the hose, you can degrade the life of the hose, and you cause wear faster. So your ROI may change because you're having to replace the hoses more often. Along with the cost of some of the hoses out there could be hundreds versus $1,000 per foot for 2 feet. Those are things you need to consider and look at in your ROI as you're using. Footprint on these are pretty tiny. They're pretty small, so they will fit into fume hoods or in your labs pretty easily. So that's definitely an advantage. It is not pulseless. Pulsation, you cannot add a pulse dampener here. The pulsation is going to be very steady. You're going to see it when you measure out the flow. If that's okay, then this could be a good technology for you for one of your reagents. I can tell you though that from previous experience and some customers' commentary, they have seen issues with these certain peristaltic pump technology trying to stay calibrated. So if you're worried about accuracy and accuracy of your flow, you need to be very concerned about that and take a look at just measuring your flow consistently. But if you have, again, in a continuous processing or flow chemistry application, you can use different types of pumps for different reagents. So you have to consider each chemical you're using and what you're going to need it to do, or how it's going to need to react within the system. A couple other technologies is gear pump technology. This is pulseless flow. It is just straight through. It's bidirectional too. So I don't know that you would have a need to go two ways in some processes, but maybe you do. But if you have a gritty material or something with a little particulates on it, it will grind away the gears as it goes through. So the life of the product will not last as long. It will take a lot longer. It will take some time to change the gears too. There are a couple gear pumps out there that you can change within a couple minutes, which work very well. But from the standpoint of continuous processing or flow chemistry, I think this is a technology that might be more used on the full production side once you have mixtures all set up. Diaphragm pump technology. This is a simple technology that's out there. Again, very similar to piston, to the reciprocating pump, like a train engine, pulling the piston back, sucking the diaphragm out, pushing the diaphragm back in. There's little maintenance to it. The diaphragms pretty much go forever, but you do have to consider, the particulates do wear away some of the coating or the edges of the diaphragm. Check valves, check valves, check valves. We all know that they can be a bane to our existence sometimes when they get fouled up or messed up. Most diaphragm pumps out there have check valves, and you'll have to get into priming here. So that's not usually an issue with some of the other pumping technologies, but it can be tricky if it does. I will say from the standpoint of looking at all these technologies we just talked about, okay, the syringe, the reciprocating, the peristaltic, and gear, for the most part, you're going to see syringe, reciprocating, and peristaltic in the lab environments and even in scale-up, especially when you're getting to multiple reagents being added in to the process. You don't see gear so much. You'll see diaphragm occasionally, but the top three you will usually see are syringe, reciprocating, and peristaltic. So when you're looking at laying out or designing your continuous processing system or project, consider those options there. So real quickly, ISCO does sell pumps. We have some options out there that are helpful for specific applications here. You look at for batch, batch processing is still out there. It's not going away. So we're not saying it's a bad thing. We're just trying to show the difference between the two. We have, some flow rate is very solid for our syringe pump, and pulsation, reacts is very solid for reciprocating pump. Flow chemistry or continuous processing, we have also our pumps here, the D series and reactors are very good for these specific reasons. Precision is key, accuracy is very strong, chemical compatibility across the way is very strong. So let's look at some of the things you want to consider as you're designing the pump into your process. I've got a couple slides here, and we'll just kind of address some of them as we go along. Okay. What type of pump? First and foremost, you have to consider: are you going to design a batch process, or are you going to design a continuous process flow chemistry type system? As you're starting, I'm sure you know that already. Again, you're looking at where you're going to have to design or set this process up. Do you have the room? What's going to take, lay out what's going to take up some of the space? The reactor, the controller, the pump, the basins with the material in it. You have to look at and lay that all out on a piece of paper and decide how much of that space you really want to dedicate to the pump. Again, there's pump sizes out there that differ with their performance and ability. You have your smaller ones. I mean, you can get super, super tiny peristaltic pumps. They're about as big as a phone that sit on our table, our iPhone, etc. So consider that. What is a flow rate and pressure needed? These are some things that you should know. This is like motherhood and apple pie. You know this stuff, but I want to walk us through it. Number one here is viscosity of the fluid you're looking at, because as I talked about the different types of pumping technologies, viscosity and or particulates in the material will dictate the type of pump you need to use and how well the pump handles it. If a pump says it can handle highly viscous fluids, make sure you just determine what it does to the actual performance of the pump. If it degrades the flow rate, if the flow rate says it, you need to be 5 milliliters a minute, but your fluid is 1,000 centipoise, does the pump change? It can handle it, but does it lower the flow rate? So you have to adjust that through the process. Make sure you understand that. The other thing here, you obviously know the chemicals and materials you're working with. Match them up to the metals or the materials in the fluid path. Very, very important. Again, that'll also help you narrow down the type of the pump you need. These questions over the next two slides are designed to kind of get you into what type of pump you need and what options you need on the pump. Okay, so we talked about viscosity. That very clearly can eliminate certain technologies. The corrosion-resistant materials, that can eliminate a whole, narrow it down even farther as far as, okay, what pumps have the ability to work well with the material I'm dealing with. And then obviously there's you can use a holding tank and keep the material there. I mean, there's different ways to get around it if you so needed to, but remember the cost and the ROI that you're trying to get. Does the fluid need to be heated or cooled? I mean, or is that going to happen in the reactor? Sometimes viscous fluids, you can heat them up and they become a little more viscous, so they're easier to get through the system. If you need to do that, can it be done on the pump through a jacketed head? Or a temperature control system like a little jacket around the syringe, or does it need to be heated up before it gets into the pump itself? You want to look at all these considerations. Does your fluid have particulates or need to stay in suspension? I know sometimes, from a syringe pump, you can add a mixer to the D series from ISCO that will help material stay in suspension so that it stays in the state it's in, so it pumps out better the way you want it. So that's something to consider. You probably couldn't do that with the other pumping technologies that are out there. I don't know that you can add a mixer and mix the fluids within the pump to help the materials flow through. So if you need things to stay in suspension and you want them to flow through nicely in the state that they're in, maybe you're going to have to go right to a syringe pump. What type of plumbing connections? That's just the size of the ports, etc. Your external control. Do you need a controller? Does it need to go back to your PLC? The same thing with the communication requirements in the software. How are you going to run the pump? Is it just going to switch it on and let it go? Are you going to have it monitored and maintained remotely through a PLC? Does it go into the Toledo iScan or iToledo, whatever that is, that they have? These are things you want to look at. And then can the pumps you're working with do that? That'll help narrow down the selection of pumps you have. Okay, more questions. How long is the runtime of the pump? You need your pumps to run 24 hours. That's something that some pumps can't do. There are certain pumps in the market that just can't run for 24 hours, or if they do, it actually degrades how long they're actively effective. Consider it from the standpoint of movement of the diaphragm. If your diaphragm is guaranteed for 10,000 pumps and you're running it for 24 hours and you're going to burn up 5,000 of those pumps in about a month's time, you're cutting your life of your product down, or you're cutting the life of your diaphragm down. So that's something you need to consider. And again, that'll narrow down the type of pump that you want to use, technology or the size, etc. Do you need the mount of pump? Again, you look at the space of a hood or you look at the space of a lab, and there's always vertical space. You can put something on a shelf, you can hang it upside down, you can hang it from the side of a wall. Can the pump still work in that orientation? If it does, then that's the kind of pump you need to look at, the technology and the class of pump. What other equipment? We talked about reactors, we talked about pulse dampeners, valves, basins, potential vessels off to the side. You obviously want to build that all into, okay, what portion, you have X dollars to spend. How much am I spending on a pump? How much am I spending on the other stuff? And then will the process be scaled up or used for production? Again, we go back to the functionality. Can the pump technology actually do that? If you're using a peristaltic pump to run your process and test your process in discovery and R&D, can you translate it to a larger scale and in pilot? And do you have to change the pumping technology that you're using? You have to go from peristaltic to syringe. What does that do to the process? You'll have to look at the max pressure of the reaction to consider if the pump can handle it. How long will the reaction take, and how long do you plan to pump? Sometimes in pharmaceuticals, they're creating a batch, not in the term of batch processing, but in the term of they've got 1,000 grams of this material. They want to pump it in and react it with 2 other types of chemicals, and then when that 1,000 milligrams is all done, the process is done and over with. So you want to consider that too. Again, going back to the first question, when you're looking at running the pump 24 hours or how long it can pump, make sure the pump can do what you're looking for. Let's see. And then how many different streams are you running? I mean, are your environmental needs different for the different streams that are coming in? If you're running 6 different streams coming in, each one, what are the specifications for each one? And then narrow it down to the type of pump or the number of pumps you need to do it. You consider all the questions we just asked, including if you need a single head or a dual head. If you're pumping out of a cylinder, or if you need a faster flow rate, et cetera, these are all pieces and parts you consider. As we look at continuous processing and flow chemistry overall, just these questions here we walked through, plus the earlier things we've talked about, you can clearly see that the pump is an amazingly important part of continuous process. And these slides and this information here should help you narrow it down to the type of machine or type of pump you want to use that's best for your process. This here is just a picture of an example we did here. It's a paper that one of our employees wrote. Very, very basic flow chemistry example, but it's two reagents coming in, being pumped in with the reactus reciprocating the pump running through a reactor and calling into an ice bath. Very simple reaction, but it shows that there is a pump. We have pumps out there to do this. You can search on Google Scholar for a long time, actually, and you can punch in Teledyne ISCO pumps or reciprocating pumps, flow chemistry reactions, and you will get all kinds of papers that are out there of people that are used these for applications and the types of pumps and what they've done with them and how successful they've been. That is definitely a good starting point for you. We do have application notes on our website too if you want our help with something. So with that, I'm just basically going to kind of wrap up here and give us time for questions. But I hope today, as I've walked through the key things to consider when you're laying out the continuous processing system, in relation to pumps, the things you need to consider, the things you need to look at, and give you some ideas to help you narrow down at least what pump you should use. And whether it be an ISCO, whether it be somebody else, it's important to me, but it's also important that you get the right pump that is going to give you the best result and give you the best process you possibly can and get you the money back on your ROI. That's really what the name of the game is. So with that, why don't we'll stop here, and if there's any questions, we'll take them now. You don't have to speak up. You can probably type in the questions if you wanted to into the chat, and we can answer them as we go along. Good. One thing I will say that if there's any questions outside of this that people don't want to address on here, you can obviously reach out to us and we can talk to you individually if you wanted to. Give us a call. We have great people here that have tremendous amount of experience and ability to answer most of all of your questions. Well, so I don't see any questions coming up, and I know we're all very, very busy folks. So I want to take the time I want to say thank you very much for you taking your time today. I hope you found this webinar at least a little bit educational to help you as you're thinking about laying out your process and your systems over the coming days and months. We look forward to reaching out to us and ask us any questions, or if you want to know more about the pumps that Teledyne ISCO uses, you can go to our website, or you can come and give us a call here. Again, thank you very much, and I guess this will end our webinar for today, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you.